heard your audio yet. I don't know if you were talking or unmuted.
So we can't hear us. No,
No, I don't think you can hear, so I will send her a message. Can you guys hear me?
yes.
Okay, perfect.
I'm gonna see if we can
There's a new thing that he doesn't seem to be send it to Jessica so maybe she's there.
Yes, Jessica,
Yes.
sorry about
Thank you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Yeah, I had to go
I'm sure
back.
you weren't just like playing a joke on me and being like, what?
I had
Oh,
to
you
close
can't.
out and come back in to get audio.
Oh, is that right? Okay.
Yeah, I couldn't hear anybody.
Okay, we can deliberate. We can just do it by mime. It's fine. We just do this.
Charades.
Boy, reading off the code number, however, with fingers would take me a while. That would not be good.
You know, this go around nicely. All the motions are made. So
I know. How great is that, right?
Potential new ones, but yeah.
So, but I'm assuming, Catherine, just to be thorough and complete the public record, I should read that whole work session action ordinance concerning all those numbers, code changes, all that.
You don't have to, because that's just the way that we always do it with the data and the ordinance.
to this September 15, 2020 City Council work session. Thank you for joining us in this remote meeting format where you, as our state and community continue to deal with the COVID-19
Yes.
pandemic. This format enables the City Council to meet and take care of business while keeping everyone safe. For work sessions like this one, where there is no opportunity for public comment, those wishing to access the meeting can do so by watching the live stream available on our website, the broadcast on Comcast 21, or by calling in to one of the phone numbers listed for this meeting on the public webcast and meeting materials web page. And thank you all again for joining us and tuning in. We have the first item of business is a work session and action on an ordinance concerning accessory dwellings, replacing the term secondary dwelling with accessory dwelling throughout the Eugene Code 1971 and making additional amendments to additional sections. And I'm not going to read through the whole code, just a reminder that there are 5 motions that have already been put on the table. And so they're already active, and staff will be available to support your conversations. My goal is to move through this in a pretty efficient way, given there's been ample time for study and engagement and deliberation. And so with that, I'm hoping we have, and there is Councilor Evans, excellent. So I feel comfortable beginning. The first motion on the table is a motion amendment, is a motion to amend the number 1, which would amend the ordinance to remove garbage screening standards for ADUs. I think this one is pretty self-explanatory, but staff can answer any questions that you may have. Is there any need for further discussion of this motion before we vote? Councilor Semple.
Thank you. I don't think this is going to make a big difference. How much is it to screen your garbage? I know there's a precedent in Fairmont. I think it would be nice if everybody screened their garbage. I'm going to vote in favor of this. And if it doesn't work out, we can always add an ordinance later that whole city screens their garbage. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Alan.
Yeah, I think that it's actually a really good idea, but I think it's a really good idea for all new infill, not just ADUs. I think just doing it for ADUs is kind of doesn't fit right for me. I'd love for this to come back as a motion to have screening for garbage cans for all new infill, as opposed to just ADUs. And we can include ADUs at that time. And if we did, I would support it then.
Okay, so the motion stands as it is related to ADUs. So that's not a motion to amend this. Okay, any other comment? All in favor of this motion, please raise your hands. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 opposed. 1, thank you. So that passes 7-1, thank you. Okay, the second one. The second motion on the table is motion to amend number 2, which would amend the ordinance to increase the height allowances for ADUs. And I understand staff is available to offer some comments, brief comments, so I will turn that over to staff.
Thank you, Mayor. Just a brief reminder that what we're talking about here is a change to ADU height, and just this is really the graphic that's in our figure table. And so what we'd be changing is for detached, you'd be changing where the slope setback starts. It's currently proposed at 10 feet. The amendments would change that to 15 feet. And then for detached, it would change the overall maximum height to 25 feet. And yeah, so if there's any further questions, I'm happy to answer those if any of the councilors have them.
Thank you. It looks like Emily and then Randy.
Thank you. I've really had a tough time with this. I spent all day yesterday, all the papers, the whiteboard arrows. I'm wondering where we got, where the numbers came from, because we didn't see them until July, I believe. So I'm just wondering, where they came from. That's a question.
Yeah, they were first, Councilor Surratt introduced them as part of a motion. I would say that there was also testimony requesting in the record from May 20th and potentially some before that. I can't recall exactly, but requesting that they increase the heights. So I'm assuming that Councilor Surratt's motion was either related to that or completely separate. I do not know for sure. So,
well,
that's
regardless of the public comment in October 23rd, 2019, we voted on whether we would like to do this, but there were no specific numbers. We asked staff to come back with that, and it didn't. It came from Councilor Surratt, and I don't believe we've had a public hearing on it. We've certainly gotten a tremendous amount of emails. And as far as deliberation, this is the first time we've talked about it since then. I live in JWN. I'm not in a special area zone. I live in the poster child of infill. Evidently, when these bungalows were built, maybe there was a zoning ordinance. They're actually very close together, which I always wonder about. But there's a lot of infill. We've got interior, attached, separate, duplexes, fourplexes, apartment buildings. We've got it all here, and we really are impacted. I have an 8-foot setback, and my neighbor has a 5-foot setback to a 2-story building. I can see nothing to the north except my bedroom and their living room are together, and my kitchen and their bedroom are together. So I know what it's like to live here. I moved in 17 years ago, totally aware what was happening. I'm just really having a hard time with it. And sometime in the future, we're going to be able to build a house, and that will have the parameters of being 2 stories. To me, an accessory building is smaller than the big building. And I've looked at some accessory buildings on alleys and the setbacks in the backyard, and looking onto the backyard of the big house, awesome. Looking into the backyard of the house next door, you know, not so great. Strange things happen. Somebody could build an ADU. I lived in a house where they chopped down a big tree, changed my privacy. I think, still don't really know what I'm going to do. I think that it's not time yet for such a height for ADUs that close. Thanks. I'm really interested in what everybody else has to say.
Okay, Randy and then Mike.
Thank you, Mayor. Since I came on council, I've really worked hard on this issue to try to understand the different perspectives, and I've sought a way to try to achieve a balance between our desperate need for more housing, more affordable housing, but also preserving livability in our neighborhoods. And I still don't feel that I even know where that balance is. I do know we need housing. Of all the amendments, this is the one I've struggled with the most is the height, because I think it does have the most potential impact on existing residents in the area. I've asked for some time, what is the difference between a 1.5 and a 2-story, full 2-story structure, with the 1.5 getting almost the same square footage. Well, I finally had an architect respond back to me to that question yesterday, and he explained, well, it's not just that. Part of it is in keeping with good building standards with a 3-foot crawl space with adequate roof pitch for drainage, as well as adequate space for insulation. I'm still struggling with it. I'm still uncomfortable with this one of all of them, but I'm probably going to end up voting in favor of it today just to get this thing moving. I know it's going to be challenged, but the faster we can get through that process, the faster we can come into compliance with House Bill 2001, and we can start producing more livable options for people in our community who are struggling. Thank you.
Mike and then Alan.
This is the hard, thank you, Mayor. This is the hard one for me too, because as near as I understand it, I think it complies with all state law that that apply here in our decisions on this. I have always felt that one of the consequences of infill and density that I don't like very much is the loss of sunshine into somebody's backyard because of the fact that that impacts their ability to grow their own food. And that may be a little personal, and I like doing that, but I think a lot of people in Eugene do. And as a result, you impact others' ability in that way. That's a problem for me. I actually I love my house, but there's only one downside, and I have a neighbor behind me with a 2-story house and a balcony on the back that looks right into my backyard. And so I understand the impacts to livability with something like this. But I also am in favor of making sure that we're giving ourselves the greatest possible opportunity to have greater opportunity for new housing in Eugene because we need it so desperately. So I'm really of two minds about this, and I'm frankly not sure. Like Randy, I think I'd be interested in the rest of the discussion. Thanks.
Alan.
First of all, I misunderstood the first motion, so I'd like to change my vote to remove that requirement from ADUs. That's consistent with what I said. It's not how I read the motion, but that was my error. So I'm a yes vote on that, to remove it. And I think we should do that for all infill. Zach, on this motion, to me, this is a tough one too for me. It's the balancing act between livability and being a good neighbor and efficiency of ADUs. And I think probably, well, increasing the height's going to increase the cost of ADUs, which makes them less likely, but for some of them. But I guess, and this doesn't allow a 2-story building, but it does allow kind of a loft space, correct? That's kind of the point. Can staff address that? It makes the ADU more efficient, but it increases the wall height that you'll see across the fence. So can someone address that? The efficiency of the ADU and the spaces.
Councilor Zelenka, thanks. I can answer that the 25-foot maximum height limit proposed allows for a 2-story ADU, whereas the 18-foot limitation would make it more restrictive and difficult to construct a 2-story ADU. Starting the 15-foot setback for the slope, where the slope setback starts near the interior property line, allows for a structure to be located along the interior setback line and has room for the crawl space and roof line, and makes it a little less restrictive for where the ADUs can be located.
Yeah, okay. I guess the test that I apply to this in this balancing act is kind of in my backyard test. So if this were in my backyard, how would I feel about it? I understand the need for ADUs, but I also understand the need for being good neighbor and livability. And I think this is too much of an increase and in terms of building height and wall height, that I think it goes beyond what we should be doing here. So I don't think I'm curious to hear what other people have to say about that. Thanks, Mayor.
I don't have any other counselors in the queue. I will, Counselor Saret.
Sorry, Mayor, I thought I had raised my hand. Yeah, so I'd like to respond since these are my motions. So to answer Counselor Semple, the height suggestions were proposed in public testimony, both written and oral testimony that we received. Some of that from architects who spoke to the challenge of trying to build ADUs and fit them onto lots with the current limitations. The reason we haven't talked about them until now is because a majority of this council voted to postpone for since July, a discussion of them. But they were out there, and when we had that public hearing and we heard from advocates that very night, I said, I intend to bring back motions on this that are responsive to that public comment. So it was never a secret. I think the fundamental question we need to be asking ourselves today as we vote on this is, are we dedicated to trying to build more housing or are we not? And I know, and the advocates for these amendments have acknowledged that fixing our ADU code is not the be all and end all of building more housing, but it is one important place that we can build more housing, more infill, decrease sprawl, meet our climate recovery goals. Right now, I have a 2-story apartment building that looms over my backyard, and presumably it was built in compliance with code. There are a lot of things we accommodate when we live in a city. We don't live in the country. I don't care what suburb you live in this town. And we have nearby neighbors and we have impacts on each other, and we make trade-offs to accommodate our individual desires and versus the greater needs of our community. So I appreciate staff's input on the technical details. I think that's really important. I recognize these motions are not without impact, but the impact of sprawl, the impact of having to continue to expand our urban growth boundary, the other trade-offs that we as a council so far have not been willing to make, will be impacted as well if we're not serious about figuring out how we allow more housing types within the current UGB that we've decided to adopt.
Thank you. I have Mike and then Emily and then Alan.
With the greatest amount of respect possible to my friend Claire, I don't mean any negative kind of comments. I just want to clarify something she just said, because it's an important fact I think we should take into consideration when we're doing these sorts of things. The words that she used, and it was just casual part of the conversation, to continue to expand the UGB. Let's be clear, we've never expanded the UGB for residential housing in Eugene in 40 years. We've never done it. And that's why we're in this problem, in my opinion, because we've refused to grow out in a moderate and balanced fashion as opposed to growing more densely. So I just want to be clear. I think we should be doing both in order to build enough affordable housing for everyone in a balanced way. But to say, it's this versus continuing to sprawl, we've actually never done that. So thank you.
Okay, Emily and then Alan.
On October 23rd, 2019, I went back and looked it up, and I voted in favor of both motions to incentivize more ADUs. And staff was going to bring back an ordinance including that, but it didn't happen until Claire's motions. Cities grow from the inside out. I don't even want to make this argument because I don't want all ADUs. But cities grow from the inside out. Start with a few houses on the river and you end up with skyscrapers. There's a lot of ways in between. I would love to be able to have a yard where I live. Instead, I intensely garden my planting strip. But there's not many houses down here that do have yards. So I don't know that we'll fit in that many ADUs, and if the rest of the city wants them tight and high like that, and then I guess that could be what you build. The potential, the happening of another house on the lot is gonna kind of take away the height, privacy, sunlight. I think we should have more community gardens if we're gonna do this, and more dog parks, because the denser we are, we still need to get outside and have trees. If we let them be taller, we can have more open space, more trees. And I think that's really important. I don't believe that a lot of these will be built. I'm ready to sit back and say, show me, build them. And we already kind of allow it, you know, maybe it was different zoning then, but where I live, we're the poster child of what this is about. I agree that we should expand our UGB because some people do like to live in suburbs and have yards, and we're not going to be able to do it in the center of town. It's going to grow both to the south, down to the river, across the river. Love it the way it is, except for the crime and the homelessness, and this might at least help the homelessness. I don't want to vote for it, and I know some people will be very unhappy, but I asked for us to go in this direction 2 years ago, and I'm going to stand by that.
Okay, Alan and then Claire.
Thank you, Mayor. I don't think we're going to actually get very many ADUs for a lot of reasons. The biggest one being cost. They're pretty expensive. It's interesting to me to have this conversation. We've been talking about ADUs for 4 years. Eugene tends to talk about issues a lot that really don't have very much of an impact. This isn't going to have very much of an impact on our housing problem. I don't think we're going to get enough ADUs to really make a dent. This is analogous to our discussion about banning new gas infrastructure. It doesn't create a lot of greenhouse gases, but we're talking a heck of a lot about it. It really doesn't make a significant difference. But having said that, I kind of fall back on to the livability arguments. This doesn't really prevent ADUs, but it does affect the size and the mass of the ADUs. So in this case, I think this is just a little bit too far for me in terms of how big that thing's going to be in someone's backyard. I think we're going to a big structure versus a reasonably sized structure. I don't want to stand in the way of ADUs, but I don't want to create more livability problems and aesthetic problems. I don't think this doesn't impact whether or not an ADU gets built. I think it impacts what the size is. And so for that reason, I'm not in favor of moving the height limits up.
Claire.
Thank you, Mayor. Yeah, thank you, Councilor Clark. I didn't mean to imply that we had expanded our UGB because you are absolutely right. And what I was meaning to say is we've made a decision not to expand our UGB, and we know we are going to have more people come here. And yes, at some point in the future, we will probably have to expand that UGB. God, I hope it's not to create more suburbs. I think, you know, we need to get over ourselves in terms of that format. Millions of people live in really wealthy, well-off countries in, you know, semi-attached buildings with each other and, you know, thrive. We don't all have to have the home with the white picket fence and the big green grass lawn in the back, but I digress. So this council, the previous council, made a decision not to expand the UGB, and therefore we have a responsibility to figure out how else we allow more housing types within the UGB we've adopted. And then in terms of the loss of trees, I've the one woman and her contractor I sat down with, you know, they were twisting themselves into knots figuring out how to locate a pretty modest ADU on her property without removing any trees. And so I believe by providing some more flexibility in our code around this, we will actually help people avoid having to cut trees down than the other way around.
Okay, thank you. I want to move forward and have the vote. And I just want to say one thing, which is that this is, you know, this council is acting on climate change and you're acting on population growth and a housing shortage. This is one way to do this, walking the talk. And the state law is intended to remove barriers to ADUs. And it is clear from testimony that this height limit of 18 is a barrier to building. So I'm just reminding you of the context in which you are functioning. We're complying with state law, we're removing barriers, and we're also trying to meet our climate goals, and ADUs are an efficient source of housing. So with that, I am ready for a vote. All in favor of this motion, raise your hands.
Mayor, you can't see me. I've been cut off by the host as far as my video is concerned.
Okay.
So I'll get it to you verbally.
Okay. So what is your verbal vote, Councilor Evans?
Oh, just a second. Go ahead.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I have 5 in favor. So Councilor
Yes.
Evans, 6. Okay, thank you. And opposed? 2. Thank you. So that passes. Thank you. And we're on to the third one. This third motion on the table is a motion to amend number 3, which would amend the ordinance to increase the slope setbacks height allowance for ADUs above a garage. And I believe, Jeff, I believe you're prepared to speak to this also?
Yeah, really briefly, just as a reminder, this is for just where the slope setback starts. So whereas before we were talking about changing the maximum height, this is only changing the slope setback, and we're looking at changing it from 18 feet to 22 feet. And again, this is just to allow for flexibility for the 2-story structures to be located along that interior lot line. And I'll stop there and leave it to the council.
Okay, thank you. Is there any questions or need for deliberation on this motion? I see Alan and then Emily.
Yeah, this one doesn't bother me as much. It's a more modest change, and the slope, I think, significantly changes the way that building will be perceived. So I'm okay with this change.
Thank you, Emily.
I think that what we just voted on, if you voted for that, you got to vote for this one. So yes.
All right. If that's all the comment, all in favor of this motion number 3, please raise your hands. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and Councilor Evans, 8. Excellent, that passes. Thank you. On to the fourth motion. The fourth motion on the table is motion to amend number 4, which would amend the ordinance to remove the maximum wall length standard for ADUs. And again, I will turn this to Jeff for a quick summary. No? Yes, okay.
Thanks, Mayor. Trying to find the unmute button. This standard requires building wall lengths that are more than 25 feet to have an articulation component or some sort of break in the facade. And it's an odd standard. It essentially, anytime it requires a change of minimum depth of 2 feet. So if you have a wall running 25 feet, there's got to be some break in there where the building adjusts backwards or forwards. So it's a design component, and I'll leave that for you guys to discuss further.
Claire.
Thank you, Mayor. So I spoke to this, I think, when I brought it up originally, but just to reiterate. So this is one of those, what seems like a minor thing that adds to the cost of building because it's requiring some architectural change that needs to be built that might not otherwise be included in the design of the ADU. It serves no practical purpose in terms of the housing unit itself. It's meant to appease, again, a person who might be viewing the building from another location. So for me, this is another one of those. Are we concerned that our code is facilitating building of additional housing types, or are we concerned with the aesthetic view of some neighbors who might live near or next door to this particular building?
Okay, thank you. Alan.
Yeah, I apply the backyard test for me. We have 2 ADUs on my block, on different sides of the block, where they're really long blank walls, and they're really tough to live next to. and applying the backyard standard of livability, you know, very slight increase in cost for, I think, a big trade-off on livability. So applying my backyard test, I think having this articulation somewhere in there and breaking up that really long blank wall is a really good idea, and it's pretty modest in cost.
Okay, Mike.
Thank you, Mayor. My biggest problem with the height issue was that it removes the ability of a neighbor to do something with their own property, that being to garden in their backyard if there's a loss of sunlight. So for me, the aesthetic value of what it looks like is considerably less important, and especially in this case when you can build more square footage without having to create the indent there. I'm fine with this one, but I wanted to differentiate it. And again, the reason for me was about the loss of rights to the neighbor.
Okay, if there's no other comments, we're ready for a vote. All in favor of this motion, please raise your hands. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Opposed? 1. Okay, thank you. So that passes 7-1. And now we're on to motion to amend number 5, which would amend the ordinance to eliminate slope setback height limits along streets and alleys for ADUs. And again, I will turn this to Jeff for explanation.
Yeah, this is probably the most nuanced motion that's here. So I'll just briefly walk through this. So really what it is we're looking at slope setbacks. And so if you think of how slope setbacks typically occur, they require a slope from all angles. And so this is what it would look like for slope setbacks on an ADU. You'd have to build the ADU within this area. And so you can see that it's even angled away from the alley. What this proposed motion would do is it would actually take the slope away from the alley. And the reason that, you know, staff supports this is that the slope setbacks are intended to control bulk and height to adjacent property owners. And when you're up against a right of way, you know, the next adjacent property owner is on the other side of the right of way or a fair distance away. So that's why this is what it would look like. And it would allow flexibility for structures to be located along this and have shed roofs or other situations like that. Whereas in these examples, you would have to either locate the building further within the property or create some form of hip roof in order to manage that. So if there's any questions, I'm happy to answer.
Thank you, Alan, and then Emily, and then Claire.
Can you bring that graphic back up, please? So in this example, Jeff, the alleys in the back, or the public right or the private street, but so it only applies to that surface, not the surfaces abutting the neighbors that are not on an alley, or correct?
That's correct. So if, say, the neighbor is here in front of the property here, the slope setbacks along that property line will still apply. The only places the slope setbacks wouldn't apply would be along the actual right-of-way face. So you're correct. In this case, this would be an alley. Sorry, this is my sketch. That's not very detailed.
No, it's very helpful, actually. It's a good visual. You know, applying my backyard test to this, this doesn't impact people's, it doesn't violate that test for me. So I can go along with this amendment.
Emily, and then Claire.
I'm wondering if we want to put a number on this. Does it have to be an alley or a street, or it can be some other right of way? I think this is a really good idea. I live on a corner. I have that very little setback, but I can see all the way across the street. And there is a 3-story building across the street. And except when the sun's really low, I get sun except for the great big trees. So I'm just wondering if that's a possibility, that we can say it's 8 or 10 feet. Would you be open to a friendly?
Claire, do you want to speak to that, or?
Well, I wonder if Jeff could offer, what the typical right of way is? Because my understanding is most of our alleys are more than 10 feet wide. So you'd have the 5-foot setback from the property line, and then the alley or the street, which is going to be big, bigger even than that. So Jeff, I don't know if you have something to add.
I mean, the typical alleyway is 14 feet or more. Beyond that, it's hard to say if there's any different situations. And just to clarify, this includes private streets, alleyways, and public streets. That's the way we wrote it. So, yeah, so plus the 5-foot setback, as Claire mentioned.
So, it says alleys and streets, so I guess that doesn't mean 3-foot side. I'm okay. And thank you for the explanation. I really appreciate it.
Okay, Claire, additional comment?
Yeah, just again, really appreciate the graphic. That was very helpful. This came out of a conversation with a contractor and their client, both Eugene residents. And again, the same situation of trying to figure, the back fence of that property abuts an alley, and on the other side of the alley is the back of a commercial building. So there's no resident on that. And so staff, I think, really did a great job figuring out how to word this to create a very limited exception to where that slope setback would have to be applied. And I really appreciate the work on that and hope this will get support.
Matt.
Thanks, Mayor. I've been uncharacteristically quiet this afternoon, doing a lot of listening. And I really want to, I want to address a couple things that have bothered me a bit before taking our vote on this. And before doing so, I want to thank Councilor Syrett for carrying the water and being so intentionally pro-housing. ADUs are not going to solve the housing crisis. They're one piece among a great many. So whether the issue is alley setback or height requirement, I'm enthusiastically supportive, as I was prior to our council break. But some of the things that I've heard that have bothered me, Mayor, these ADUs are not space stations that are going to block the sun. We get about 155 sunny days out of the year here. The national average is 205. And last time I checked, the earth spins around the sun at about 1,000 miles per hour, 24 hours a day. So from my perspective, when I look out my window, I see homeowners who I've become friends with here in South Eugene who can see very clearly into the attached accessory dwelling unit I live in. As the only counselor who's A, a renter, and B, lives in an attached accessory dwelling unit, I could use more space here. It's one of the reasons why Becca and I are getting a bigger place. I'm excited that the 9-month journey of searching for homes is coming to fruition, but I'm saddened that I'm not hearing enthusiastic advocacy when it comes to livability of renters, and in particular, families that want to keep their familial units together in an affordable fashion through the creative use of accessory dwelling units. So when I hear livability in a neighborhood, I think about the livability of those who are renting as well as homeowners, and those who are seeking small a affordable housing solutions, like in this example, ADUs. Mayor, I will be voting in the affirmative, as I did before council's break, to support the 5th and final amendment that Councilor Syrett is proposing. Thank you.
Thank you. And Randy?
Thank you, Mayor. I just wanted to clarify, when I'm speaking about livability, I'm not distinguishing between property owners and renters. For me, it is both. Anybody who's in the existing place, I am concerned about their livability. I'm also concerned with developing more housing. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. If there's no other comment, we're ready for a vote. All in favor of this motion, please raise your hand. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and that passes 8-0. Thank you very much. And thank you, Claire, for bringing those motions forward. All right, now, before we vote on the sixth motion, which is the main motion to adopt, I understand that Emily has a motion to substitute.
Can we get those big red buttons like Staples has that say easy when you want to talk? Catherine, do I talk first or make the motion first?
I recommend making the motion first, and then if you have a second, you can
Okay.
speak to it.
Move to substitute the following motion for the motion to adopt the ordinance as amended. Move to direct the city manager to prepare an ordinance that comprises the proposed ordinance in attachment A as amended, but revised by substituting for section 10 amendments to the SC Chambers Special Area Zone and sections 18 and 19 amendments to the SJW Jefferson West Side Special Area Zone. The amendments for the SC and SJW zones dated August 23rd and August 21st respectively, as submitted by Ted Koopman on behalf of the JWN, and to provide the required public notice, the required DLCD notice, and to schedule a public hearing regarding the revised ordinance.
Second.
Okay, I have Councilor Clark. Mike, you want to speak to this?
Thank you, Mayor. I hope that my colleagues will vote in favor of this. My reasons for doing so are predominantly twofold. One, I don't agree that the current staff proposal complies with our comp plan with regard to density. Number two, I think expediency has put some of our neighbors in an unfair position. I think that some of the pieces of this treat some households differently, and that rubs me the wrong way. But with regard to the most important piece that everybody agrees on, every testimony we've had, everybody at this table, it's, for crying out loud, let's get done with this. Let's get something done. Let's actually accomplish something. I don't know about the rest of you, but I'm tired of being a part of the gang who can't seem to shoot straight with this. And to not vote yes, to vote no on Emily's motion here is to guarantee that we won't finish with this for at least another year, and that remand number 4 is on its way. So I have a couple questions so I can help my colleagues see the things that I see. Jeff, number 1, I have an email from some constituents, or not constituents, but some residents in JWN that lists some very specific bullet points about notice with regard to the staff's position here, the DLCD particularly. Are you familiar with the points I'm talking about?
Generally speaking, I assume, yeah, I've read the testimony that we've received. And
my question is, why is it you think that we did notice correctly? Or maybe a different question is, do you take issue with the factual statements that we failed to notice DLCD properly?
It's
So
my
you're-
understanding.
Yeah, this is a legal question, so I'll go ahead and address it.
I thought that might get you in here.
Sorry,
I thought that might get Emily to jump in there. So
the concerns that are being raised are with respect to an early draft of the ordinance that was provided as a courtesy by staff, like on April 16th, I believe it was, for your May 12th public hearing preparation. So it was provided on the website so folks could have a really early look at the draft as it existed at that point in time. It was not a legally required provision to the public. It was a courtesy early posting. As more comment came in and as more staff critical review of the draft occurred, the ordinance was updated. And so that by the time it was prepared for legal notice under our charter and prepared for the AIS to go into the council packet for consideration at a public hearing, it had been updated. As soon as an update happened, that was replaced on the website as well. But you know, that happens over time. An early draft may have several revisions before it's time to present it to the council. And then of course,
sorry, I apologize. Go ahead.
I think that addresses your question. I think that it may be a fairness concern in some way, but it's not a legal concern. And the updated notice was what you had the updated version was what you had your public hearing on and what was in your packet and put out to the public through that process.
Can you tell me the date that you noticed DLCD on those parts of the ordinance that deal with lands east of Chambers? What date did you notice them?
The DLCD notice, I believe, was sent on Mark or Jeff. You can probably provide that. It would have been in April 12th. Yeah.
Forgive me. My understanding is that during the adjustments that you mentioned, Emily, that's when the language that deals with lands east of Chambers was added. Is that incorrect?
There were the revisions, yes. And so those will be reflected if and when the council acts. You know, the council, for example, made 5 amendments already tonight. So the final version with all amendments and updates will be sent as a post-adoption notice under the law to DLCD.
But don't we have a requirement for a 35-day notice, whether there's anybody impacted or not, DLCD in advance?
Right, and that's what that April 12th notice was.
But did it include the parts that substantively change it geographically? That April 12th notice, did it include the lands east of Chambers?
I don't know if it included those. It's the same. I'm not certain if it did, but it would have satisfied the requirement.
Sure. Let's say hypothetically that it didn't. Why isn't that instantly remandable? If it didn't?
Because the DLCD notice isn't the same as the DLCD notice. Sure. Anticipates that 35 days from before the public hearing, there will be changes. And what the requirement is at the post-adoption phase, we are required to identify specifically at that point the substantive differences from the original 35-day notice that have happened to adoption. So we call those out in the post-adoption notice. The DLCD.
Thank you, Emily. I appreciate that. I have 10 seconds left, so I'm going to need a second round, Mayor, but I would say that's one of 3 particular issues that I feel absolutely certain this will be remanded, and we'll be dealing with this for another year. So I'll talk more in a minute.
Okay, thank you. And Emily, I apologize because I didn't give you a chance to speak to it. So I'm going to let you go next. My apologies. And then I've got Claire, and I see Greg. I see you.
Thank you, Mayor. I appreciate that. You know, I'm bringing this forward from my constituents, which is part of my job. I don't live in the special area zone. I do live in very edge of JWN. I think it's important that we listen to our constituents and give them a chance to speak to it, even though they've talked to us almost endlessly in emails. We need to be transparent and accountable. Their suggestions do follow the law, so that's acceptable. JWN special area zone isn't all that big, you know, and it only counts for there. The double density thing came about because they wanted to build 2 houses, which is actually more living space on a lot. And, but now, you know, it's really 2 houses on a standard lot, that's an ADU. So because they were more lenient, they're now potentially being punished. I really hope you'll support it. I do not like to be pressured by threats, but the reality is we're going to talk about this again. And we can either have a work session, a public hearing, get on with it fairly quickly, or we can wait for the appeal and talk about it in the future. I don't see this as having a drastic effect on the rest of the city. I don't see it having a huge effect in how many ADUs can be crammed in there. I voted for all the amendments which take restrictions off of ADUs. I ask you to give my constituents a chance to make this go fast. Thank you.
Okay, Emily. Oh, sorry, Claire.
Thank you. So I don't think the goal, I appreciate Emily clarifying that she's bringing this on behalf of her constituents. That's right and appropriate in her role as counselor. However, based on the past performance of those constituents, I don't think their goal is to help this go fast. I don't think their goal is to help us create good housing policy. I think their goal is to delay, obfuscate, and get special treatment for a neighborhood that does not have any particularly more pressures on it than my neighborhood, than the friendly area neighborhood, than West Eugene. I don't see any justification for this one neighborhood to be exempt from this code. And I find it curious that as passionate as these advocates are in their emails and letters, they are asking for a very significant change to an ordinance. And they were completely absent from any public forum except 1 or 2 at a public hearing, and didn't feel that their advocacy for these significant exemptions didn't warrant expressing them in public at public forum the way the advocates who are asking us to adopt the current version did. I would urge us not to be swayed by the idea that this will get remanded if we vote for this. That argument didn't prevail all those years ago when we were working on this topic, and we were told by staff that we couldn't disallow flag lots and alley access lots, and we went ahead and did that anyway. And then sure enough, LUBA said, yeah, no, this doesn't comply with the law. Staff has told us in their highly qualified professional opinion that if we adopt this substitute motion, we will be required to hold another public hearing. So I don't think that equals getting this done now. And certainly people have the right to appeal if they feel that there's an appeal needed, but that doesn't mean they're going to win their appeal. So I'm going to reject this substitute motion, and I hope my fellow counselors will as well.
Thank you, Greg, and then Alan.
One of the reasons why I voted to support this motion is that, one, the autonomy of neighborhoods to determine how they are going to plan out their future. We're talking about basically 2 neighborhoods that are already well-developed neighborhoods. I think that you will have some people that will put some ADUs up in places in the JW zone as well as in the chamber zone. But I think that it needs to be nuanced, and we need to understand that, adding ADUs in certain areas may have a dramatic effect on how the rest of the neighborhood evolves or doesn't evolve. I have alley access lots in my ward. I have flag lots in my ward. Hell, you can build anything in my ward. And we really don't have the structure to be able to get into the nitty gritty of what we really need and how we are going to be able to meet the needs and demands of our constituents, at the same time addressing the issue of lack of housing. So I think Alan was earlier said that this is not going to create a stampede of people building ADUs, and I would say particularly in those two neighborhoods. If people are going to build ADUs, they're going to build it out in my neighborhood. They're going to build out in some other neighborhoods where you have larger lots and you have the ability to do that. Now, I know there's some that are built in South Eugene, but again, there's not a lot of ADUs being built, but ADUs add to the housing supply. So as far as that's concerned, I'm supportive, but I have a little trepidation when we are talking about dictating certain constraints to neighborhoods that are diametrically opposed to those constraints.
Okay, Alan, and then Emma, and then Jennifer.
Yeah, there's an old saying, too little, too late. I think this one's too much, too late. People had 2 months to do this, and we got it last week. I know it's been working on for a long time, but be that as it may, I believe all neighborhoods are unique and special, but Jefferson West Side is not sufficiently different from all the other neighborhoods to be singled out and treated so differently in this way. And so in the end, I also don't believe that these changes actually comply with what we're trying to do and in all these changes and comply with HB 2001 and the ADU laws. So I'm not going to support moving forward with this request.
Okay, Greg, I see you. I've got you in the queue. All right, Jennifer, and then we'll go back to second rounds.
Thank you. So I just wanted to share, I will also not be supporting this. This is actually a really exciting day, I think, because we're able to move forward on something that, while it's small in scope, just dealing with ADUs, I think it really signals how we're going to be moving forward in our housing discussion and how we're going to be making space for more people and more housing. And I think that's exciting and something we should be proud of. My neighborhood is special to me, not because there's some invisible line where you walk into it and all of a sudden it's different than everywhere else in the city, but because that's where I live. But I recognize that the conditions in my neighborhood and the conditions in Jefferson West Side are very similar, even if we're in different places. And I agree with Alan, this is a little too much of a difference for me to be able to support it. I think we've worked really hard on this ordinance for a long time, and the original ordinance makes sense to me, and I'm going to support it.
Thank you. We're ready for second rounds, but I am just going to jump in because I want to comment on the fact that neighborhoods are unique and they each have their special values and concerns, but they are not autonomous. And the point of this state law is that they are not autonomous and that we are trying to create a predictable and consistent and fair landscape across the community. And so to start to parse this out and suggest that sort of towards the end of the game that specific neighborhoods have exceptionalism can pull themselves out of this process when the intention is that citywide it is a fair and consistent and predictable planning landscape. So I just want to say, yes, we can honor what's unique and special about your neighborhoods, but the intent of this law is not to give you autonomy, but to actually create predictability. Okay, with that, it's Mike, Emily, and then Greg again.
Mayor, and thank you, Mayor. The Mayor and Alan have highlighted, I think maybe Claire did too, exactly why I am in support of this. That we should treat all neighborhoods equally, that we should have consistent rules. I believe that the staff's presentation doesn't do that. It treats some neighbors differently. It makes them live with double density, and it's not fair. And that's the reason for me that that and a couple of other reasons are why I don't think it squares with the comp plan. And on its substance, I think it'll be remanded. But here's the bottom line. Again, we're all talking about time. This is a really simple choice. It's either going to take us 5 or 6 weeks, or it's going to take us a year to finish. One or the other, guaranteed. Either we are willing to go back and do this the right way with a public hearing again, or we're going to be challenged on appeal, and it'll be remanded for a 4th time, and it'll be another year if it has to go to the appeals court to happen. But for me, I just need to say there's absolutely sufficient evidence that will be remanded. And if anybody would like to wager on that, I'd be happy to take it. When we do, it's another year before we get done. If we go this route, we can let everybody have their say and be done in 5 or 6 weeks. That for me is a really simple choice. We need to do it right. I don't think we have to this point. I recognize that the votes aren't there, so I won't belabor this longer, but this has 2 problems. One, we're falsely arguing that somehow it's going to be this JWN proposal for the changes that treat them fairly would somehow be remanded too, when our staff has already said it won't. Our staff has already said it meets the proposal that Emily's putting forward meets the state law. And they're just asking, don't treat us differently and make us live with double density in some parts. And I think that's worth a public hearing to determine. It's at least smart for us to take the original staff piece back to public hearing so it doesn't get remanded. Either way, again, it's a choice between 5 or 6 weeks and another year. And I'll take anybody at the table here that wants to make a wager on how the outcome goes. Thank you.
Emily.
Thank you. This proposal does meet the law. The law does not say that every section of a city has to meet the law in the same ways. We've heard many, many times about the work that went in to Jefferson West Side. Times have changed, parameters are changing. They already allowed this, and now we're going to double it on those lots. There's special area zones. Doesn't that mean they're treated differently? Otherwise, why would they be called special, and why do we have them? Public hearing doesn't take that much time. I don't think it will hurt anybody to take 5 or 6 weeks to listen to the public and vote for it. Let's get it done. And please, let's do it right and take a little more time so we can get it done. I think it's okay. And if you don't think it's fair, then, can talk about it later, the next time we're voting on it, whether that's in 6 weeks or a year. I appreciate your support. Thank you.
Okay, Greg.
Yeah, a couple of things on this and more big picture. We're on a clock. We're on a time clock as far as this is concerned. If we don't get this done, at the end of 2022, the state is going to step in and they're going to superimpose their planning regulations. It's going to be their thing. It won't be ours. And we will lose home rule here. That's a slippery slope. We've been fighting this at the League of Cities for a long time, is to retain home rule. The other thing I want to point out too is this, as far as that's concerned. Vince Lombardi once said, after the Packers lost to the Eagles in the championship game of 1960, he said, "We didn't lose. We just ran out of time," which to me is pretty much the same thing. We may end up running out of time. So whatever we do, whatever we decide on, we have to be expeditious in dealing with it. Yeah, we've been beating this horse for 4 years, but we really, really need to get this done. We need to turn this back over to our staff and have them work their magic, and let's get something that is viable, that will be acceptable to the state, and keep us out of the position of being taken over, by the state of Oregon. That is not a good thing. We will lose all of our autonomy, and we will lose the ability to make the laws that we need to make around land use planning. So there's my 2 cents.
Okay, Alan?
Yeah, I'm not quite sure it actually works like that. Emily Jerome, so we put forward an ordinance, it gets remanded, we go through that process, and let's say we don't resolve all of those issues by the time the deadline rolls around. Does that mean that all of what we've done gets thrown out and the model code that put forth gets instituted?
I think there's just a little confusion around which law we're talking about here. So this is the ADU portion of the new state statutes from 2017, and it became directly applicable already to us in 2020. What you're referring to is the middle housing package, and that has a model code that would apply after a certain amount of time if we haven't acted. So this one, the state is already imposing its regulations on us.
So this one's already in effect, and it's not 2001 about middle housing.
It's a different part of 2001. It is very confusing, but the legislature treated these two parts of it differently.
Thank you for clarifying our confusion.
Sure.
Okay, I think we're ready for a vote on this motion to substitute. So all in favor of the motion to substitute, please raise your hands. 1, 2, 3. All opposed? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So that goes down. Thank you very much for that discussion. And now we're back to the original motion. So the next motion on the table is the main motion to adopt the ordinance in attachment A to the AIS as originally moved. And is there discussion? Looks like there is.
Well, we need to put the motion on the table,
I
don't
thought
we?
this isn't on the table yet. That's sorry.
No, the motion is on the table.
It is on the table. Yeah.
And so it is
I thought it was.
the main motion to adopt, and now it is as amended with Councilor Syra, your 5 motions that passed. So it is the main motion to adopt the ordinance that's attached as Exhibit A as amended. And that is on the table and ready for action.
Okay, and it looks like Mike has something to say.
Excuse me. Thank you, Mayor. I do. I'm going to vote no on this. And the reason I'm voting no isn't just because it treats one neighborhood unfairly. In doing that, it doesn't comply in substance, in my opinion, based on what I've seen and heard and read. And I want us to get done with this. And every single person that testified to us seems to think that we need to do something now. And I agree. And we've had 3 bites at this and not got it right. We're doing it again. on its substance, this would be remanded, in my opinion, not just procedural issues. And we would have been smarter to go back and hear the whole thing and do the proper notice and do it right. So when this comes back, there's a possibility I'll, make a comment or two about that. If it doesn't, I'll eat crow and I'll say it out loud. You all were right and I was wrong. I'll be happy to do it, but I'm going to vote no because I think we're wasting another year. Thank you.
Okay, with that, all in favor. Emily, go for it.
Thank you. I don't think that we're treating our populace correctly by not listening to them when they ask us to, and it would be expedient to do that. So I'm not going to vote for the motion.
Okay, all in favor of the main motion to adopt. Oh, wait, Councillor Evans, are you voting or are you needing to speak?
I just want to make a comment.
Okay.
Since our substitute motion went down, I'm going to support the main motion. I believe that we need to move forward. We can't kick this around anymore, sans the confusion between the 2017 legislation, the 2019 legislation. We really need to get moving on this, and I'm just not willing to hold the train up on this one. There's some other people who do. That's their prerogative. And one last thing I want to say. In this conversation, last couple of years, there has been a racial component that has been injected in it. That racial component applies only to Portland. It does not apply to the rest of the state. We do not have ghettos in Eugene. We do not have segregated communities in Eugene. You can buy a house anywhere you want to. The problems with race go deeper, and they go into mortgage lending. I'm sorry, Mike. Mostly banks and insurance companies who typically charge higher rates to people of color when they're trying to buy a home. And sometimes they add points to the loan. So let's be clear about this. That is a non-issue in Eugene.
Okay, thank you. With that final comment, all in favor of the main motion, please raise your hands. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and opposed 2. Thank you. That passes. Thank you very much. And this took a little longer than we'd hoped, but I'm glad that we have resolved this. And I will say to all of you, echoing Jennifer's comments, that really, this is important work. It's been hard to do this work. We're recognizing it's one piece of a puzzle, but that the rest of that puzzle is coming to you also as council. And the rest of the community beyond Jefferson West Side is looking to you to create opportunities for more housing to be constructed in this community. And we received an enormous amount of testimony over the months in support of this ADU legislation. So I appreciate that Jefferson West Side is not content with this and that we have councilors who are not content, but we have a vast number of constituents in this community who want us to do this work, who are glad that you have done this work today and look forward to the good work that you'll do on housing in the future and on climate change, which these two things are closely related. So thank you very much for that discussion. And with that, I think we'll just adjourn because there's not enough time to go on to the ward boundary discussion and the census. So with that, thank you all, and we are adjourned.